Hey everyone, how's it going? David here. Welcome to the Living Nightmares podcast. We got Mark, usual suspect there.
I'm Brandon.
Brandon.
Zach.
Surprising you didn't say squirrels.
No, ends everything with squirrels.
Sometimes I start
He
with
starts
squirrels.
things with squirrels too.
It's a squirrel sandwich.
Maybe.
All right. Do we have any news we want to talk about?
Not as far as now. We do have the Tony interview is up, so please watch it when you have an opportunity. I know that we have. Please stay tuned to Facebook because we're going to have some wonderful snippets from previous interviews that we have done. David's working very hard on that.
Yes.
And then obviously we have another interview with Lee Esposito. That is his last name. How do you pronounce it? Cool. I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it right. It was a fantastic interview. We had a lot of fun, especially our little random topics towards the end of the interview, which were a lot of fucking fun. Please stay tuned for that. And then, of course, always please like, share, and subscribe and tell everybody you got. I will pass it over to the B-Man to do our interview for our interviewee this time.
All right. So today we are interviewing a musician that we met at the New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival. We checked out his table and really liked the sound of his work, and we invited him onto our podcast. And yeah, without any further introduction, welcome Rob Benny, aka Cucurbitophobia.
Yep. How's it going?
It only took him 2 times.
Oh, thank you so much, sir, for being honest, regardless of if we can pronounce your name correctly.
We're very illiterate here.
Public schools, homeschooling.
Yeah.
You can tell the difference. One can read, one can't.
I literally have to proofread.
It's disgusting. But thank you so much, sir, for being on with us. We appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your show. I'm really appreciative of you having me on. So thank you for having me.
Of course.
Absolutely.
And then extending my apologies that I was not there in New Jersey. I actually was I was training for a new job.
Oh, cool.
I'm training for a new job down in Dallas, and unfortunately, I could not attend. It is a job in sales, not in wrestling. You know what? All right. Long story short, I've said this on many podcasts, but I'll say it for your benefit as well.
Every podcast.
There is a wrestler that looks just like me. We don't know this guy's name, or at least we haven't been able to find out who he is. He is in the WWE, and he looks just like me, except much bigger built and stacked, like a wrestler would be. But he does look like me, in a lot of ways, does act like me. So he is essentially
But somehow he does not dress anywhere near as flamboyantly as you do.
No, sir. Actually, no. He is far worse. He rocks a Canadian tuxedo like no one's business. I will tell you that. The amount of Levi that's going on with this dude is just it is pure redneck perfection.
Redneck perfection.
Redneck perfection. So I extend my apologies, but I'm glad that we're getting to meet now. So
awesome.
Yeah. Every guest that we have from New Jersey, he's gonna have to do that explanation.
I'm gonna have to explain to everyone about that.
Because I enjoyed very much telling everyone, yeah, he's trying to become a wrestler instead of being a professional guy.
And actually, just for that, we're gonna post a link to that video below, and Brandon's gonna have to go and find it.
No, we said on the last interview with Lee, you have to find it and send it to me.
Oh, damn. Fine, I'll find it.
Go find your body double, Mark.
I'll find it. So yeah, man, we'll get this kicking off. Brandon has his phone ready, so he's ready to go. And then I actually have my question of the podcast prepared for later.
Good.
So
everybody did their homework this time.
Yes, they did.
Wait, we had homework?
Most of us did our homework this time.
Public school, man. Come on. My dog gave it. So kick it off, brother.
So I was looking onto your website, reading about your background, and you actually have quite a few interesting influences I want to talk about before we get into your actual music career. So you have influences in horror, both movies and video games. You have many music influences, backgrounds, and a lot of instruments, your bio said. But let's start with your horror influences. What got you into horror? What movies and video games? What transferred you over into horror music? Were there any specific scores or composers that inspired you?
Okay, this is going to be a good long discussion because it is a lot of different avenues I've explored from a very young age into my teens and then right up now to my adulthood. When I was younger, I mean, I first was scared of everything. I mean, I would watch Disney movies like Sleeping Beauty, for example, or Snow White, and I would be, pretty, enchanted, but yet terrified by the soundtracks and by the witches in those movies as such.
Hey, don't you worry about it. That evil witch stepmother and everything else is quite fucking scary. So
actually, if you go on the ride at Disneyland, it is for a kids ride. It's kind of creepy.
It's kind of like going back and watching Are You Afraid of the Dark and going like, this is okay for an adult, but we were allowed to watch this as children. This was acceptable on regular television. Like I if you like Zach, who's watched movies from a young age, you watched the Freddys and the Jasons of the world, but this was on television and we were allowed to watch that without parental permission. So yeah, I understand you. I get it.
I mean, and plus, the show Tales from the Crypt was also on regular TV back then, in the 90s. And I mean, being a 5-6-year-old kid at that time, I mean, some of that is pretty chilling for that age. I mean, looking back, I mean, some of the shows in Tales from the Crypt are pretty funny, but for that time period when you're young and you're not exposed to a lot of horror and you have night terrors and nightmares at that age, it could interestingly give you some, anxiety or some, very creepy dreams to have to live with every day.
It's that age got even horror comedy is a thing.
Yeah. The 90s. Fucking up a kid's childhood one program at a time.
I say it made my childhood pretty damn fun.
Yeah.
Depending on how you look at it.
But then I got into the Alvin Schwartz book, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, with the original prints, with original artwork, and some of it, some of those photos and some of those drawings and sketches they were really chilling, and combined with the folklore and urban legends throughout, they would give me a lot of vivid ideas. Once I got into my later, to mid, close to my teens, like 9, 10, 11 years old, I started to get a lot of ideas for horror in my head. And I used to write my own stories and journal entries that I would never take with me or take to school or show to anybody, but I would just record a bunch of journals and entries depicting, a lot of these ghosts and demons and monsters that I would project in my head. And a lot of that, became much more pronounced when I started getting into my teens and started exploring more classic horror movies like, Halloween, the original Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Child's Play, the most of the material from the 70s and 80s that started really getting me deep into horror. But it wasn't until I started studying music in college when I started getting more into the composition of the horror film score. Because the horror film score to me initially was just a bunch of creepy, dissonant noise thrown together. It wasn't until I started studying composition when I realized, no, these composers knew what they were doing, and they knew how to put these sounds together and layer these notes that would clash with one another and create the atonal dissonant sounds that would give people the shivers. Particularly speaking, a movie like the original Halloween, John Carpenter, or perhaps Bernard Herrmann, who composed Psycho, the original Psycho, that was brilliant. And those were some of the original compositions that started to get me deeper into studying dark classical music.
I mean, it made the movie. I mean, I don't know if I'm sure you watch a couple documentaries on Halloween, but he went to go show Halloween to a set of executives, and there was one executive in the audience who saw it without music, and she said, I'm not really scared by these movies. They're not really my thing. It's just kind of lame. And he had music to it, and then he went and he said, oh fuck, well I better go get some music. So he went and did the music himself, and he put the music to the film, showed it to that same producer, I think almost 2 weeks later. It was a very short amount of time, not enough for her to forget about the original screening. And she came back to me after the film, scariest film I've ever seen. That's the power of a score and music in general in those type of movies or any type of film, really, that can really have a significant impact on people's attitude and feelings towards the film.
Oh, definitely. Very much agreed. And it wasn't until I started to listen to more of these compositions throughout these movies and started to also study the scores of video games in my 20s, like games such as Condemned or Gears of War and even Call of Duty. I would just listen to like some of these different scores throughout and the different musical cues throughout, and it would just make me realize, like, okay, like this is important. Like a lot of this is what hits people's emotions and drives people to conceive new imagery and project new ideas. Just by hearing different tonality and different chord structures, combined with accents and rhythms that hit unexpectedly.
Right. So it's going to your music influences. So it sounds like you were really drawn into the technical aspects of the horror score. Like you mentioned, these composers knew how to layer those notes or compose those notes. I'm the most musically challenged person in the world, so my terminology is a little off. Feel free to correct me.
That's cool.
But yeah, so you mentioned that they did know how to arrange those notes. And in listening to your most recent album and prep for this podcast, there was a lot of, I guess, composing or layering. We'll go into more detail about that later on in this interview. But your music does create that feeling of dread on some tracks, or there's one track that really felt like it belonged in a chase scene in a movie, and we'll cover that more later on, of course. So it's what does go into deciding where to put those notes?
Well, I think, Matt, what it is, you come up with a theme or a motif. You come up with a repeating pattern, such as, for example, if you take a pattern in a piece that has a few notes, which just repeats itself, like it goes up, ascends, descends, and just repeat that motif, or create a certain piano pattern that has a 4 or 5 note sequence that repeats on and on. Take that and then layer underneath something completely different that has no relation to that, but give it a different sound and clash a few notes with that sound to make the listener confused, conflicted. Where is this going? This sounds like it's going in one direction, but the other is taking me in a different direction. Sometimes that cognitive clashing creates cognitive dissonance within, and creates that anxious sense of dread, as you described. And when you add more throughout, especially at a different range or dynamic, which is a different level of volume, that also creates more suspense or allows more apprehension to set in, not knowing where this is going or where it's taking me, for example.
So it's kind of like a magician's misdirect in a way, kind of, or you're trying to stimulate 2 different parts of the brain at the same time. Yeah. And it's like making someone's brain go 2 different directions at once.
Yeah, like, do I run? Do I stay? Do I fight? Do I flight? Do I stand in frozen in silence, or what? Or do I scream?
Yeah.
So it is actually like how when somebody's really scared and they know they should run, but they can't move. So it's kind of creating that feeling through music.
Yeah.
The body cannot distinguish physically between fear and excitement. So often those wires can get mixed and get manipulated the easiest. When your body's reacting to stimuli, you can't tell the difference between that. The only thing that can tell the difference is, how your brain is reacting to whatever situation in that case and everything else. And that's also based on the person. Some people are going to find some things exciting and some people are going to find things horrifying. Take, for instance, watching horror movies. Some people think shit's exciting. Some people think that stuff is horrifying. Or somebody like me is a little bit of both. So there's something to be said about that. Yes, that's really fucking cool, man. To have emotions.
Speaking of that, like that feeling you were talking about, I got that with one of the songs for your latest album, which I'm not gonna try and pronounce the name of. It's called "As the Sun Sets, She Emerges From."
The Ashes,
Uh,
yes, yes.
yeah, so that one in particular, it started off like really eerie, and then like all of a sudden it started having these like guitar riffs, and I was like waiting for Metallica's frontman to just come in and say, "Yeah."
Yeah.
So I was like, "Where is this? Is this where it's going?"
Interestingly enough,
Metallica eventually.
yeah, interestingly enough, when I was composing that, a friend of mine, Nicolas Pappalardo, who plays guitars on this album, I contacted him because he's a jazz trained musician and he does a lot of interesting avant-garde music too on itself. I mean, he's big into King Crimson and a lot of like um, like Robert Fripp's solo work from the '80s. You know, a lot of Talking Heads. So he does some really weird stuff on his own. So I'm thinking, I told him, I said, why don't you collaborate with me on a few of my tracks? You know, and I'll collaborate on some of your efforts as well. So he came in and just laid down these guitar riffs and just did some really amazing work. And particularly as the sun sets, he definitely came across with like a almost like a Steve Vai sort of Satriani kind of approach to it, doing a lot of these like strange chord changes and note manipulations. But like you said, it has that heavy metal '80s feel to it. You know, I thought of like movies like Lost Boys came to mind or Near Dark when I was composing it and it came together.
Nice. We're all very, very, very big fans of Near Dark.
Yeah.
So you know, and actually, there's a lot of correlations between jazz musicians and metal rock and roll musicians. I mean, one of the perfect examples is Garth Sanderson, the first drummer for Megadeth,
Yep.
was a classically trained and jazz musician, and that's where he got his perfection licks and everything else, which was a perfect transition over into metal. So when a lot of people hear, things of jazz, they pick up metal. And when people really study metal, not just for, how fucking loud and how fucking fast it is, but for its technical aspect, you can find a lot of shit from jazz on the other end as well. So it's funny that you actually mentioned that you heard a little bit of both, and you were saying a little bit of both. There's a lot of correlation there with those two different things. So that's pretty fucking cool.
That was definitely one of my favorites for the album.
Yeah, I really like that one too. And that's actually a good segue into the next line of questioning I was going to have. Because I did have in my notes later on that I wanted to talk about how that track in particularly was like layer on top of layer on top of layer on top of layer. I was going to ask if you ever collaborate on any of your tracks, or is it all you? Which obviously on the track we're collaborating with the guitarist. So what goes into creating all those different layers?
Well, I create the blueprints, and a blueprint comes to mind where I'll think of a vision of a certain theme that I want to go for. For example, on As the Sun Sets, She Emerged from the Ashes, I wanted to go for vampires or, something similar in that vein. So I went for the organ, the piano, the very gothic sort of, backdrop to it, and presented that backdrop to my guitarist, and he just completely just did a great job in evoking that 1980s heavy metal horror aspect to it, which was unexpected, but it just worked so well. And when he started laying down the tracks that came, the rest of the tracks that he appeared on, he did something different on every track, which I really found fascinating. So it didn't sound like everything was just cookie cutter, one after another. It was just everything has its own character and its own, sense of horror that it's supposed to evoke.
Do you ever record at the same time, or is it like he lays down his track first and then you write your portion in reaction to that, or what's that creative process like?
For this album, I did everything first, and he came in after I presented the tracks to him. Because my initial idea was to have different musicians appear on different tracks throughout. But this time around, I chose him because I work in other projects with him, and I've known him for a long time, and I trust his musical expertise. So I had a feeling that he was going to do something really good with these songs. So I gave him 4 or 5 compositions, and he just nailed it right off the first take. So I was really impressed.
Nice. So you mentioned that you had vampires in mind for this track, and we had a little bit of a conversation about the pronunciation of this word before we started recording, but I think this is a good segue into this. But you have a lot of it looks like it's spelled Samhain, but it's of Gaelic origin. You had another potential pronunciation that I'll let you tell us all. But it has a lot of, but your music does have a lot of Halloween vibes to it. The Samhain, which apologies if I mispronounced that. But can you tell us about how you incorporate those influences into your work?
Well, the definition that we're talking about originates from the Gaelic holiday, Irish and Scottish origin. It's technically pronounced Samhain. Samhain, and it's weird because a lot of words of that vocabulary from that time period were spelled completely differently than they were pronounced. A lot of, if you look at English, Old Welsh, early Gaelic words, none of them sound how they appear. Yeah. But the holiday is it's an early pagan holiday that originated in Ireland and Scotland and Gaelic traditions, and it was celebrated by a lot of pagans at that time period, which was supposed to be the end of the year, the beginning of the dark half of the whole year. Like it falls between the winter solstice and the autumn equinox. It's supposed to be like a halfway point between, along with other holidays like Imbolc, Beltane, and Lunacy, which that's another word that has a completely different spelling. A lot of those pagan traditions and holidays were celebrated, in a very spiritual context. Samhain, or Samhain, as it's pronounced, it's supposed to be much more demonic. Talking about spirits of the underworld, about a Day of the Dead. A lot of the earlier traditions were much more macabre, not as like hokey as they are nowadays in the more contemporary framework of Halloween. A lot of what we think of as Devil's Night or Mischief Night, a lot of those similar traditions were carried out on Samhain. A lot of mischief, a lot of trickery, magic rituals that could be interpreted as black magic. So, there's a lot of history and a lot of things you can research and dive into if you're interested in the darker aspects of the black arts. But a lot of that intrigued me to incorporate into my work because I've always liked studying the different demons and devils of the different underworlds of different cultures and different religions, and how that intertwines into a lot of horror as well.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. The day that the world of the living and the world of the dead were at its thinnest in Samhain. And then, which basically at the end of the day, it just meant like you either produced enough crops to survive the rest of the winter or you were fucked. That's why most people just died. It wasn't, there was a spiritual element to it, but most of the time it was you have enough crops or you don't make it until summer and your entire village is gone. But the whole thing of that is that the spirits would come back from the underworld and hang out, and they could stay before the portal closed, but you could also end up in their world before the portal closed and then be stuck there for an entire year. But most of the time they would just walk into the forest and then disappear. And that's how they explained it. But it's crazy. It sounds a crazy holiday. It's crazy how it transitioned from there, from Samhain all the way to what we have as present day Halloween. And I hear it in your music too. I definitely got a chance to check out a few tracks. I enjoyed on your website, the first one that was on there. I really, really liked. Everybody was saying their favorites. Was
Ominous Mansion on Oak Road.
As all eyes set upon you. That particular one. I really.
That's the album.
Oh, is that the album?
Yeah.
Oh, then it was the first track that I played.
Oh yeah, the Ominous Mansion on Oak Road. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then it was the first.
No, but I see where you're going because the title pops up in front of you, so you think it's the album. I've seen people had that same thing before. So
yeah, exactly.
No big deal.
Public schools. What are you gonna do? Actually, the funny thing is that that track I really loved the most, and actually I saw snow when I was hearing it. I got that vibe. I guess because I saw there was a haunted house in Universal Studios at Halloween Horror Nights, It was a completely original idea. It was not related to any property or anything like that. It was set in the Elizabethan era, and most of it was covered with snow. When you first walked into it, there was a decrepit carriage set in, and then snow would come down, and there was one spotlight. And I'm like, where the fuck was this 5 years ago? Where was this track 5 years ago to put into that house? Because it would have been perfect. It would have been exactly what it was supposed to see.
Nice.
And if and just as a friendly piece of advice, not that anybody's asking for it, if you ever ran into a filmmaker that was doing a period piece in the old English or in the Elizabethan era or even early colonial America, I would recommend that. I would recommend that particular track because it would work really fucking well.
Yeah, that track was actually one of my favorites as well. Particularly because roughly about halfway through, it almost became like a horror waltz, kind of.
Yes.
It was getting a little Haunted Mansion feel too, a little bit from the Disney age too, a little bit.
I was going for that vibe very much when I created it. I was thinking if you walked into a haunted mansion or a house from the Victorian period, seeing somebody playing the piano, whether it's a ghost with a top hat and a tuxedo playing, or even a female in like one of the old elegant corsets like playing or something, or doing a waltz. I wanted to create those visions of people in that era that might have either died or have been murdered or have fallen victims to some paranormal possession. I leave that very open to interpretation because any of those can make a house or a mansion appear ominous to the person looking, who sees it and goes, oh, maybe I shouldn't go there, or maybe I should see what's there, but I'm too afraid to step in because I don't know much about the history of this place. And that was the kind of the vibe I was going for, the old classical romantic style that I wanted to convey with the music without getting too dark. I wanted to make it more mournful, but also mysterious.
I like it.
Yeah, that's definitely one of my favorite tracks. It's actually my favorite track of the whole album. So it's very like what I got from it is like really elegant. It's a really calming effect. So like Mark said, he saw snow, so it's very calming. I'm a big classical fan, like Beethoven and Mozart. So I was like, I love this so much.
Yeah, definitely hear some Mozart in there, brother. Yeah, like it's there.
Yeah,
it's definitely there.
In my own opinion, I think Mozart's one of the better composers of classical music because he made compositions people could understand and listen to. A lot of composers, and before and after, were very pompous and arrogant and just wanted to try to cram as many notes in as possible and just show their technical prowess and their understanding of music to such a large extent. But the average listener can't relate to that. They just want to hear something that's going to make them move and something that's going to tug their emotions. And Mozart did that very well. He created music people can enjoy and absorb and move to, or be inspired by.
That's funny. I feel like that clash still exists today, even in the filmmaking world. Have you ever seen the movie Amadeus?
Yeah.
Amadeus, yes. Brilliant movie. Brilliant movie.
Not the most historically accurate movie, but
still very well done.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
If Mozart wanted to relate to people and everything else, Beethoven wanted to remind you it's okay to be pissed off.
Yeah, Beethoven was an angry man. He went deaf and later in life, and he had a lot of hardships. But Mozart was much more happy-go-lucky. He wanted to bring people together, and even if he was obnoxious as he was portrayed, he still wanted to have fun and enjoy life and celebrate life. Beethoven just wanted to remind people of the hardships and the miseries of life and the sadness that he felt. He wanted others to absorb themselves and carry with them. Where I think by nowadays in today's society, you should just absorb it all. Absorb Mozart, absorb Beethoven, absorb everything in between, and draw something different from everybody.
Yeah. Absorb anything from somebody that actually has something to say, essentially.
Yeah. Somebody that has something of substance to say. You're not incorrect. That's a very accurate statement.
Let's talk about your other albums briefly. Or did you have something? It looks like you had something.
Yeah, that's actually what I want to talk about. So on your second album, The Ghost Town on the Coast, the tracks I really liked the most was this Night Terror Part 1 and Part 2, specifically Part 1. I really got vibes of very graphic imagery, and that I love that type of like work and feel. So I'd love to hear your process on that one. Like, what was your thought process on this track, and why you wanted to make it a two-parter?
Well, Night Terror Part 1 and 2 were actually recorded and demoed about 7 or 6 years ago, long time ago. Those are probably some of my older tracks. See, I've been composing a lot of tracks since 2009, 2010 was when I really started to record a lot. But I recorded probably 50 to 60 tracks in the last maybe 10 to 11 years. Only a handful of them I kept for the albums, and a bunch of them I just discarded or reworked or are planning to rework for the future. But Night Terror 1 and 2 are some of the earlier tracks that I really felt were strong and would transcend into today, so that's why I brought them back. They were inspired to me by, a lot of the different holidays and, dark festivals that, the early neo-pagans and druids would create at the time. Thinking of human sacrifice or thinking of, a lot of sorcery and black magic. A lot of that I drew from reading about those and implemented it into this whole grand scheme under a Night Terror, because someone who doesn't or isn't familiar with that kind of folklore or that kind of process would be terrified by the sights and visions that they would see if they were to see such sorcery in modern society.
Yeah, like when I was listening to part one, I literally just imagine myself walking to a room and the walls are literally just covered in fresh corpses, bloodied and just like stapled, nailed, and just flayed all along the walls. And I'm just like, this is awesome.
Zach really wants them to come out with a Manhunt Part 3.
I'm
awesome.
I'm with them.
Rockstar's a little busy right now.
Right.
They're trying to make sure that they don't end up like oh shit.
Bethesda.
Yes, thank you. They're trying to make sure they don't end up like Bethesda. They're running away from Bethesda. Right
That's
now.
not hard. Just make sure your game works.
Ooh.
Shots fired.
Yes. Pew 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 pew.
Anyways.
God, wow, that really was a fuck up, wasn't it? Anyway, moving on. I used to love Bethesda, and then Bethesda did the Fallout 76 or whatever the hell it's called. Oh, I actually got the name right this time. That's great. It was a piece of shit. And you know what? Oh God, it's like having a really good girlfriend and then she cheats on you. It's terrible.
Oh, ouch.
It's terrible. Anyway, back to bodies stapled to the wall.
Yeah, that's a great graphic image to have. I mean, even if it's just dried bones and skeletons on shelves or on a wall, surrounded by magic potions or different types of acids, created by a mad scientist. That's also something that came to mind when composing Part 2, for example. Just a mad scientist getting to work on creating different potions or, chemicals to, create new spells or potions to, enchant or entrap people in the world to, become either, possessed or, either dead, completely, obliterated by those.
Yeah. Both of those tracks really brought me back to just like 80s horror scores in general. Like they were really well done.
Cool.
Yeah, you know what? You got a really interesting touch with this, and something I really appreciated is the variety that you provide. You're having different emotions. They're flowing, and nothing sounds the same. Like that's the best. If I can give you any compliment about your music, that's the one thing. Nothing sounds the same, and everything's really good.
But you can still tell it's from the same.
Correct. Exactly. You're not exactly. That's why I meant by being good. You're not ripping off anybody. And the cool thing is your music is almost perfectly tailored to it just as a whole to haunted houses and the different rooms that you would go through and what you would see. Your music changes with the scenes that you see in front of you. If I had the power to be and wave a magic wand, I would want you to compose music for haunted houses because you have such a variety and such a specificity every room can get that feeling that you were talking about from before about invoking that emotional reaction, but making it sound customizable to what the visual the audience is seeing in that particular moment.
That's exactly what I'm going for. Something different on every track to attract a different listener, to hit a different emotion, to tap into a different fear, or create a different sense of disturbing or violent or graphic imagery in the listener's mind. I didn't want to just emerge with a generic dark ambient project, because I've heard many dark ambient projects since the 2000s, and most dark ambient I feel like is just drone. And I didn't want to go. I mean, I incorporated some drone influences throughout certain tracks, and even if you listen to certain tracks on the new album, like trying to think of that one particular. Oh, the Amulets and the Mausoleum, for example. Like that's I think it's track 8. I think that one has a lot of like drone like ambient influences that you'd hear in a video game, like even in a game like Halo, for example, but a much creepier version. I would say that I didn't want to do something that was just for 7 minutes and just have noise go through it. I wanted to actually create compositions, create different pieces of music that would evoke listeners to go, wow, this reminds me of a horror movie from the 60s or a short story book from the 1800s written by Poe or by Lovecraft, for example. That's the mood I wanted to set in with each individual track, and with each individual album I wanted to have a similar theme throughout.
Nice.
Yeah. Speaking of what Mark was talking about, how your album was different. One of the songs or one of the tracks is called I think "Invaded by Visitors" from
The Andromeda.
It's like track 7.
Yeah, the Andromeda.
It was very instrumental there. It was like very electronical. Yeah. It reminded me of if you ever watch Beavis and Butthead Do America. If I ever do like a part 2 to that, it reminded me of like him taking all the Xanax from that lady, and she had like all
yes,
really trippy like illusion kind of scene. That's what it reminded me of, and it was friggin' awesome.
Yeah, very nightmarish, cartoonesque.
Yeah.
Like similar to the Rob White Zombie segment when he took the mushrooms in the desert, but yeah, probably something more lucid and something more tranquil and like wow, eerie. I totally see that, and that's a really good call. That's awesome.
Yeah, that one actually gave me like 2001 Space Odyssey Forbidden Planet vibes.
Nice.
Like it's like a good sci-fi horror theme.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you had mentioned the 2 tracks that Zach brought up from one of your earlier albums. So it sounds like these albums are like the culmination of 10 years of you really getting into your process. Because you mentioned that there are a few that you threw out, there are a few that you want to recompose for future albums. So it's not like you're just like, I'm making music now, here's an album. It sounds like you really took your time to get to know yourself, your process, before you felt ready to start doing albums. And I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and I mean, there were times I would put out these songs under different titles in the past and put them up on MySpace or put them up on Bandcamp, and I would release them in chunks and I would release them under different names. But it wasn't until last year when I decided to really trim the fat of the material and actually take the time to register the songs through ASCAP and try to get them published and remaster them and rework them and put them out onto with a more legit physical copy and to have a legit website. I feel like for a long time I've been getting it just right and I've been getting closer to it, but now I felt like within the last year with Cucurbitophobia, I feel like right now it's just with a good narrow scope and it's just all come together. So I'm keeping it as it is now and moving in a more streamlined direction without being too one-dimensional to sound like it's just a stale repeat of one another, but still not broadening so much that it loses the horror elements and the true, mysterious element that I'm setting out for.
Nice, very nice. So I got 2 quick questions. Obviously we went into a little bit of detail about it earlier on, but I'm very curious. Where did you start? I know you were watching a lot of these movies growing up, a lot of the Halloweens, and really studying the scores and composing and everything else. When did you decide, that this is something that you wanted to do, you know, for the rest of your life. This is your passion. And for the educational standpoint of all of our viewers, you know, how did that start for you? I mean, you know, did you just pick up a, you know, piano one day and start fucking around, or how did that work out for you? And then how did you get your music out to the world?
It's very, very interesting. It's a very complicated yet simple process at the same time. It was many years in the making. So when I went to college to study music, I took many music composition classes where we centered around form and analysis, music theory, and music history from different periods. So the degree I got was pretty much, I mean, if you want to break it down to loose terms, it's pretty much a degree in musicology, music studies, music history. So, I mean, I took a minor in music management and learned the business side of music, such as copyrights, entertainment law, trademarks, you know, all the legal BS that nobody wants to talk about and nobody wants to dig deep into, but it's necessary when it comes to things like licensing or, you know, protecting your material or getting your material into things like films and TV. You know, all these things that you kind of need to know if you want to take your music to the next level, if it ever gets to that point. So I took it just to learn it. But throughout that time in the composition classes, I learned of composers like Schoenberg, you know, and Stravinsky and Charles Ives and Wagner. You know, a lot of these composers that were doing things in a very atonal, you know, very dissonant manner, creating compositions that were very harsh on the eardrums to those who were only used to Bach or Beethoven or Mozart. And you know, I was one of the few students in that class that loved the Schoenberg compositions like Pierrot Lumiere or Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. A lot of the very traditional classical music fans would just say, "Oh, this is terrible. Oh, I don't like this. This is noise. You know, anything from the 17th century is better. It's more refined. This is just trash." But I loved it. I embraced it. I liked the primitive elements, the elements that sounded scary and creepy. You know, and I started reading a lot of different history about these composers and how their works were protested and almost blackballed for many years because of you know, in the times in the 1800s and 1900s, a lot of this music was, in a sense, treated as like scary music or a devil's music. You know, this is not music we should be listening to. This is harsh on us. We should be listening to music with melody and with grace and with refined passion, not none of this noisy trash. But then when you get into the horror movies, starting from Nosferatu or from the Frankenstein movies or Dracula, you start to see a lot of those influences show up within these film scores. And when I got into my later college years and when I graduated college, I started digging back into the black and white horror movies of the past, Creature of the Black Lagoon and the like. A lot of those, even digging into the original Psycho, the Vincent Price movies like House on Haunted Hill. I started to listen to the scores and absorb from them and started to create my own compositions in the late 2000s and started to try to create snippets, 2-minute snippets, 3-minute snippets, and to see how they would come together. But it wasn't until about 2010 when I said, I'm going to try to do this legit and create a bunch of these, and hopefully maybe I'll get into a movie or get into a YouTube video one day and see what comes from there. And one thing led to another, and I started making, an abundance of tracks designed for albums. And finally, last year, I decided I'm just going to make this into one big conglomeration of material from the past and new material I'm working on and release it as Cucurbitophobia and see where it leads to, in terms of opportunity, in terms to reaching new potential listeners and fans and, trying new avenues and maybe trying things that haven't been done before.
Nice. Very, very cool.
Cool.
Very cool. Very cool.
I think that's a good place to take a break.
Yeah.
Sure.
And we're back. We just talked about what led you to creating your albums. I kind of want to talk about where your name came from. Cucurbitophobia. How did I do?
Did he do okay on that one?
No, we got it. Got it.
Okay.
Cucurbitophobia. Yep.
Awesome.
Did it. So cucurbitophobia is the fear of pumpkins. As cliched as it is, I mean, Halloween in my eyes, is all about jack-o'-lanterns, and I feel like the jack-o'-lantern is the number one quintessential symbol for Halloween. So when I created the name Cucurbitophobia and the project, I wanted to make it a project, designed around traditional Halloween themes. The jack-o'-lanterns, goblins, ghosts, witches, vampires, demons, everything that makes Halloween, in my opinion, what it should be, scary. And that's why I came up with the name, Fear of Pumpkins, to create and interject sort of a humorous, lighthearted element to it. Because, I mean, who, in a sense, would be afraid of pumpkins unless it was a jack-o'-lantern? Because a pumpkin by itself is just squash. But once it's a jack-o'-lantern, you could make something very demonic, diabolic, and very scary with whatever art you decide to use and implement in how you carve the jack-o'-lantern. I mean, that's up to the individual to decide what toys with their imagination and where it hits their unconscious fears.
Nice. I dig it.
You ever any carving jack-o'-lanterns yourself on Halloween?
I'm not a great artist by hand, but I've tried when I was younger, and every now and then I will, give it a chance. This year and the year before, I said, screw it, I'm not going to even bother. I'm just going to stick with my traditional decor and just, do the masks and goblins, ghosts, sort of thing.
All the good stuff.
I actually carved my first one 2 Halloweens ago.
Really?
Yeah.
Your first?
My first.
Damn.
And there were a few I did with my parents when I was a little kid, but the first one I actually did on my own was 2 Halloweens ago. I was staying at a friend's place. I used to work on cruise ships, and this was the week before I was leaving for my next ship. So I was staying at a friend's place before I headed out. And we were carving jack-o'-lanterns one night. And what I did was I carved Rick's face from Rick and Morty onto the pumpkin, creating pumpkin Rick.
That's really cool.
And then so it was me, my friend, and her boyfriend. We all did pumpkins. They put them outside their apartment building. And then the next day, when I was walking back from running errands or whatever, I saw these smashed bits of pumpkin. And I was like, what just happened here? And I noticed that all the other pumpkins from the building were okay, but Pumpkin Rick was gone.
Oh.
And I realized somebody smashed Pumpkin Rick.
Wow, somebody hated Rick and Morty that much.
Yeah.
Wow.
To smash the Pumpkin Rick.
I know, it was so sad.
That's a bummer.
That's violent. Unnecessarily.
Wow. Zach said unnecessary violence. Holy shit! It really must be unnecessary.
That's where he draws the line.
Violence against pumpkins. That's everything else. Everything else. Is
Pumpkin rights matter.
Amazing.
Hashtag pumpkin rights.
The Grand Pumpkin from the Simpsons Halloween special would disagree with you.
Well,
I don't know if you've ever seen that one, but it was a spoof of the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown, and
wow.
And there's a part where he starts rampaging at the school, and Nelson holds up a knife to a yellow pumpkin, and the Great Pumpkin just says, "What do I care? That's a yellow pumpkin." And Nelson's reaction is, "You're a racist." Every pumpkin has its differences, I admit it. And then at the end, when they defeat the Grand Pumpkin, his final words are, "Pumpkin segregation forever."
What?
Why?
Oh man! Every once in a while, man, The Simpsons just really hits it.
I believe it was the season 20 Halloween special, the third segment. If you want to look it up,
I will be watching that later.
It is great. It's one of the best.
Absolutely
segments,
ridiculous.
That's fucking fantastic.
Yeah, I did not expect our conversation to go that route.
So rabbit holes happen on this show quite a bit, actually.
That's cool. That's what makes the interview great. That's what makes the conversation fun. When it's not formulaic and it's not just like, okay, we're gonna start here and go there, and you know where it's gonna end. I like it when it deviates and takes a few twists and turns, and and it just becomes something better.
And then you look back, you're like, how the hell did we get here?
It's impossible. It's impossible to know. Who knows?
Only for the editor, what is going on?
Yeah,
I don't remember this conversation.
Who the hell did this? Who the hell are these guys? You know what? You know what's so funny though? We have not hit our normal trademarks in a while. Actually,
Don't
yeah.
test your.
I'm not going to test my luck.
Don't test it.
There's some regular trademarks that we cover, and we have not covered them in a while. So maybe it'll come. Maybe it'll come up.
We'll see.
I don't know.
Let it happen naturally. Stop trying to force it, Mark.
That's the thing, you know. When you force a conversation to any direction, that's where it just feels like it's it's forced.
It's awful.
Like it's like that. It's like that in a movie when you feel like a plot's going in a direction, you feel like the plot feels forced. It's almost like fuck, like you know what's going to happen, and it takes away from it. It's like you're just waiting to get it over. Like okay, here we go. But when you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know where it's going to take you. That's when your mind is just pulling you in 5 different directions, going, fuck, like, where do we go next? Like when you watch the very first Saw movie for the first time, and you're just like, wow, like this is something different, and you're just encapsulated by this horror because you don't know how they got there, and just the whole movie taking place in one room with a series of flashbacks. I mean, to me, that was brilliant. The later Saws, just watching it for the traps and the murders, but that first one really fucked with my mind when I first saw it.
Yeah, the last line of that movie is pretty fucking great too.
I don't remember the last line.
The game over, and then the fucking door shuts.
Yeah.
Fucking awesome.
Watch it again. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
I watched most of those movies recently. I got to like 5 of them before I was just like, I should probably go to sleep.
It eventually just becomes a gory soap opera.
It
really does.
Yeah.
Like you said, you watch it for the traps and the kills. That like after I say part 3 is when the series is just like, well, okay, let's see how they kill this guy this time.
It was fucking weird for me seeing that movie because I saw the movie years later, and I come from a musical theater background, and I'm a massive Princess Bride fan. So seeing him in fucking Saw was weird. I was like, oh, holy shit, you're you except much older and you're kind of fat now, and you're in a horror movie.
Have you seen him in Saw 7?
No.
See him in
Final Chapter.
Saw 7.
Saw 7 was the latest one, right?
No, that was
Final Chapter.
That was the first
I know
final
what
one.
you're talking about.
Is it
The first
the
final
Jigsaw,
one.
or is it called Saw?
Saw 3D.
No.
It's called
Saw 3D.
Final Chapter.
Because it was technically released in 3D, and like I think when it came out it was Saw 3D, but then they just made it Saw Final Chapter. But yeah, that was.
So I think pretty solid advice to stay away from any horror movie with 3D in the fucking title.
No, that is not
except
true.
actually anything pre 2000s.
Well, Friday the 13th Friday the 13th Part 3 was originally 3D, and that movie is awesome. That was when Jason first gets the hockey mask.
Yeah, I said the year 2000 with the
Piranha was 3D.
With the exception of
Fright
Piranha.
Night was 3D, and I thought
Piranha.
And we cannot forget the greatest 3D movie in cinematic history, Jaws 3D.
That was
pretty bad.
It was great.
That was pre 2000s, and it was fucking terrible.
It was not terrible. It was fantastic.
And then there's also a Creature from the Black Lagoon. Which actually, funny note about Friday the 13th Part 3, which was directed by Steve Miner, who also did Part 2 and went on to do Lake Placid. He also did a movie called House, which the original script of that was written by Fred Decker, who did Night of the Creeps and Monster Squad. After Friday the 13th Part 3,
IMDb page.
Decker wrote a script for a Godzilla movie that Steve Miner was going to direct, and it was going to be in 3D. And it was going to be just like the craziest thing. Like that was when they were trying to make the first American remake of Godzilla, just to show you how far back that went before we got the 98 version. But it was going to be like this 3D camp classic, essentially. The main character was essentially Snake Plissken from Escape from New York.
Oh, wow.
And you can actually look up concept art for the Godzilla design. I think they even started making the models for it. But the studio eventually decided that Steve Miner as director, his biggest movie at that point was only Friday the 13th Part 3, so they didn't want to trust a huge Godzilla 3D property with a director who didn't really have that many credits to his name yet.
Yeah. And you'll never meet a bigger, Fred Decker, especially Night of the Creeps fan than
I love Night of the Creeps.
That guy. He'll, and this is his story, but I'm gonna tell it anyway. Anytime somebody hasn't seen None of the Creeps, his next line would be, "Well, I know what we're doing for the next 90 minutes."
I haven't watched it.
I know what we're doing.
No,
Stop.
we're not.
I'm sorry, this interview has to end.
No, it
doesn't. It's David's fault, not mine.
No.
He's like that fucking friend who just became vegan, and all he can talk about is being fucking
Jesus
vegan. Oh, you're not vegan? I know what we're doing for the next 90 minutes. We're gonna talk about how fucking vegan I am.
Speaking of,
We don't care.
Speaking of, I had some vegans. They're close friends of mine that are vegans. My son's baby shower. My mom made Rice Krispies, and then they're like, "We're vegans. We can't eat Rice Krispies." They tried one. Try another one. Try another one. I can't stop.
Apparently, they're not that fucking dedicated.
I was like, okay.
Well,
They're really good Rice Krispies. I'm not gonna
dude,
lie.
the fucking vegan
But
police
good
are gonna
enough
show
to
up.
change somebody's complete moral center.
Clearly.
Apparently, the vegan police
I have
from,
been wrong my entire life.
Scott Pilgrim versus the World are going to show up. They're thinking you've had 2 violations.
How the hell did we get on a topic about vegans?
Mark's fault.
It's Mark's fault.
Well,
Let's continue with the interview.
we're having fun. Everyone's having fun.
I don't know how we got here.
In life in general, who knows?
I just feel my favorite tracks from your latest album. We already talked about Ominous Mansion. We already talked about As the Sun Sets.
Yeah.
I kind of alluded to this earlier in the interview, but there is the track that I thought this belongs in a chase scene in a horror movie, and that was the book Bound by Blood and Bones. That was the one I just felt the tension just ramping up and up and up, and yeah, you can easily drop that in a chase scene and it would feel right at home, I thought.
I felt that track was really eerie and suspenseful for sure. So I can see that. I had a totally different vision though for that song. Like if I would do like a remake of the Goosebumps series, I would add that as an intro. Just my.
I'm not re-listening to the track now just because you said that.
To it.
Goosebumps.
Yeah.
Is this about smoke machines? I'll buy you smoke machines.
Dude, that's okay.
I'll buy you the smoke machine.
All right, so when we do a lot of things during the day business wise, and we're planning a lot of things. So what we do for fun is we'll watch old episodes of Goosebumps. We're watching them in chronological order, which is just the quality of Canadian, young teen kid television, just pure perfection. And there's a running joke. There's so many fucking fog machines in this show. There's so many.
Yes,
I feel like the director walked on set and he's like, all right, 15 more smoke machines, otherwise I fucking walk. There's so many. It's amazing that the crew is able to get around, and do anything. I don't even know how the DP gets the shot half the time. Get that fucking fog machine out of my shot.
It's amazing. It's hilarious. I mean, I love the Stay Out of the Basement. Welcome to Camp Nightmare.
That was the one in particular. Is like that's where the smoke machine joke came from.
Oh yeah,
that was the pinnacle. It's just like, somebody get the fucking fan in here. We need to blow some of this out.
Literally a smoke machine blowing smoke off of the roof of one of the cabins. So you can see the smoke just coming down from the roof.
It looks like somebody put a block of fucking dry ice up there and just left it.
Yeah.
They said, it's really windy out tonight. We'll just put a block of dry ice there. Hope for the best. A recommendation for you though, if you get a chance to go back and watch it, it's just funny as a composer and music writer. Go back and watch how many times they fucking cheat. And because they didn't get the licensing for additional music, they'll reconfigure the fucking title music to a different type of music. They'll just play it on the piano or play it in a guitar, or they'll reconfigure it into a hip hop version of it. Vampire's Breath. The end of it's a fucking hip hop version. And I'm pretty sure all of us, when we heard that hip hop version, gave up and we're like, fuck, no, I'm going home. I'm going home. He's like, well, what about another? No, I'm not watching another fucking episode. I'm going home. But definitely check it out though as music composer. You get a huge kick out of that's the same fucking song. They just reconfigured it a little bit. And they play it on the piano or on the violin.
Or they're playing a video game and there's Goosebumps thing.
Yeah, exactly. Although
Yeah.
we can talk a lot of shit though, because in a lot of our episodes of Living Nightmares, there's other episodes of Living fucking Nightmares playing on
True.
television. So you can't talk too much smack. So
Look, it's
But
advertising.
But yeah, that's the thing, that's what I wanted to go for. But the book Bound My Blood and Bones, I wanted to go for that chase element. That's that element where someone's coming after you, you're being chased by, it could be a killer, it could be by a demon, it could be by a gang of people, like a gang of like people living in the forest as like a tribe, or like if you look at movies like Cannibal Holocaust or Green Inferno, of that nature, or you could be thinking of like organized crime, organized underground criminals, that like do these dirty illegal mafia like deeds, and when they find out someone's in their presence, boom, full out assault, full out chase.
very nice, very nice.
And then the other one that I really wanted to talk about was the Spellbinding, particularly the very beginning of the Spellbinding. It felt like the beginning of an AC/DC song layered with an Ennio Morricone track to me.
Yeah,
And then going beyond that, it just became I just really got the Morricone vibes from it.
That sentence hurt my fucking head, man.
yeah.
I wonder why.
And it's amazing how you mentioned that, because when I first made that track, I had the track completed, but without that guitar part. I sent that track to Nick Pappalardo, and he listened to it, and he was like, I'm going to come up with something really cool with this. And then he sent me the track, and I discovered these soundscapes that he did for it that were just layered on top of one another. And it just reminded me of, like you said, the AC/DC style, but it also had like this, I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Eno or Robert Fripp.
Yes.
Like Fripp and Eno did a collaborative album back in the 80s or 70s, and it was just very dense and very ambient. And a lot of that, what he did, carried that vibe, like that very, that very abstract period where progressive rock, and there was a genre back in the 70s called krautrock, which was like very experimental and originated in Germany. And when you fuse that, it just created this atmospheric bliss type music. But I wanted to take that and make it more dark and more macabre. So when it combined with the atonal piano and witchcraft like bells that I incorporated in the background with this piece, to me it was just like magic coming together.
Nice. You talk about him a lot. I was curious, how did you two meet, and and what makes your partnership work so well together in your eyes?
Well, just the differences in our musical background. Like me, coming from a more classical background, him coming from a more jazz framework. I think the classical and jazz backgrounds are much different in terms of music theory and approach. Classical is much more rigid in terms of theory and discipline and meter, whereas jazz goes outside the box and deconstructs a lot of that theory and makes it its own. So, for me, like learning a little bit of jazz was like a whole different art form. It was a much different technique that even to this day, I still find myself challenging myself to advance further in, because it's a whole different art form. Whereas classical is very much about discipline and technique, and taking a little bit from the classical and the jazz and putting it in the avant-garde experimental setting just can create a whole new world of musical styles. And what a lot of the techniques that he even mentioned to me and showed me also influenced my own writing as well. So, and once we started putting that together in terms of the music, it just came naturally. It didn't even feel like it was forced. So, a lot of the chemistry between my keyboards and his guitar playing just glued together really well.
Very cool. Did you guys meet in college?
No, actually, I played in a band for many years with his father, who was a drummer. We've played for about maybe 7 to 8 years. We played a lot of like garage rock originals and a few covers here and there. And we're actually we're doing a farewell show in January in New Jersey. We're called the Cheap Vibes, and we just played like a garagey style punkish rock, and we've had some really good times. But we like all good things come to an end, and the band is just doing one farewell show, and myself, his son Nicolas, and his father, we're all going to carry on and do another project with some more funk and jazz fusion type material, and carry on from there. And we're called Shapes of Force.
Nice, very cool, man. Very
Yeah.
cool. So,
Yeah.
Have there been any other collaborations throughout your albums?
Not at the moment. I mean, right now I'm pretty much narrowing my scope and sticking to Cucurbitophobia for the most part, working on some new efforts for the future, emerging with some new merchandise that I'll have probably for next year. Like if you see the shirt that I'm wearing now, this is my signature Haunted House t-shirt, which I'm selling on my website. I'm going to be emerging with some more shirts within the next year as I come along, in small amounts just to see which strikes the most appeal and allures more potential fans.
Nice.
Okay, cool.
What are some things that you want to try with the future of your music career? Any new styles you want to go for, or like?
Well, definitely definitely some new themes throughout. Like I'm definitely doing something. I'm going to try to release things every Halloween and emerge with something new every Halloween. I'm also even thinking, not for this year particularly, due to time constraints, but I'm definitely considering doing some horror-themed music for the holiday season as well, emerging with something that taps into, the holidays, but for those who are, maybe sick and tired of the same old Christmas stuff that comes out every year, maybe shake things up a little bit with some more haunted Yuletide material that goes into some deeper concepts or some maybe earlier folklore like Krampus.
Nice.
Very cool. Very cool.
Nice. So we met you at the New Jersey Horror Con. You had a table there. So I guess what made you decide that you're ready to actually get a table at a convention?
Well, see, it started out with my friend Steven Meitzler, who I was working with his East Coast Thrills film series. So him and I met about 10 years ago, and we started working on films together. He's a mastermind when it comes to documentaries and amusement park and theme park history. So, he was creating his East Coast Thrills film series, and the more I got to know him, he started to introduce me to his work, and then we both decided, let's collaborate and work together. I made music for his first film and his second film, and eventually started to interject some of my own music into, the upcoming film, which is coming out next year, called A Sure Thrill. And in some of the later two segments, we cover some horror-themed things for theme parks. Like we covered the Spookorama from Coney Island in East Coast Thrills 2. So for East Coast Thrills or A Sure Thrill 3, there's going to be some other horror-themed material intertwined where I added, little snippets of horror music. So even if it's not the premise of the entire documentary, it still interjects a little bit of it into it. So, him and I decided, let's do the horror convention this year. We initially planned for the Chiller Theater, but the Chiller Theater had no tables available, so we decided the next best thing would be the NJ HorrorCon. We went to the NJ HorrorCon, and the reward was far greater than we expected because we've made many connections and we've sold a lot of merch and a lot of our DVDs and CDs together. So, it opened us many new doors. And
nice. So that was your first table at a con?
Yeah, I thought it was great.
Nice. So yeah, I've done a few film scores then as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you count documentaries as films, I mean, that's pretty much the premise of doing it. But I haven't really done full-length films yet, like full-length horror films or sci-fi, although that's the avenue I'm going towards. I mean, I've been, networking with people, talking to people, giving, my music and submitting my music with my ASCAP information to let people know that, my music is licensed and that it is protected and that it's copyrighted, and I'm not just doing this just for, shits and giggles. I mean, it's still fun at the end of the day, but, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to treat it like a business and get it out into the right hands. And hopefully if it does strike with, a filmmaker who's potentially interested, I'm happy to either work with new original material or to license the material I already have to, plug into the film, for lack of a better word.
Cool. Nice. So we've talked about your albums. We've talked about a little bit of your film work. Are there any other mediums or outlets that you see yourself taking your music to, if there is anything? Like I said, I'm very musically challenged, so I'm not really sure where else
there is, but is there anything different that you want to try in getting your music out there?
Well, I would certainly try using it in computer games, video games, podcast themes, if anyone is ever interested in, accepting horror themed material. I mean, I love all styles of music and I'm willing to compose in many different genres, but horror is my ultimate passion because that's where I feel the most emotion and the most sincere feeling I can portray comes out. And if I were to do other styles, I mean, it's nice and all, but I feel like I'm being most honest when I'm creating horror themed music, and that's where I'm just interjecting my deepest primal sense, my inner primal emotions, and my inner subconscious and unconscious desires and drives sort of pour out into these very creepy and eerie musical passages.
Very cool. Very cool. I love that.
So I have a question for you. What program and system do you edit on?
I currently use Reaper.fm because, I mean, I've experimented with Ableton and I've experimented with Pro Tools, and both are industry standard, but the difference is Reaper.fm, it's the most affordable of the workstations that still offers studio quality equipment. A lot of the plugins that are used on Reaper are good for PC, whereas a lot of other programs like Logic, Pro Tools, and Ableton are good on Mac. But what I like about the PC is it's much more streamlined, and I feel like you can learn a lot and utilize a lot without having to just drop big bucks on large plugins and large brand name software. I feel like Reaper is underrated in a lot of ways because a lot of studios just gravitate towards Pro Tools because, it's the industry standard equipment. Of course, you want to get what you pay for in terms of using material, but I feel like if you're going to get good quality, and you know how to use and mix and master material on your own, it's better to do it with something where you're not going into huge debt for, especially when you have a limited budget and you don't have, tens and thousands of dollars to drop on state-of-the-art studio equipment.
Yeah. What was the one audio software that I told you about a few
Fruity
months?
Loops.
Fruity Loops?
Yeah, things like Fruity Loops is one of the.
Fruity Loops is a big one with PC. I know that.
Yeah, Studio. Yeah, Fruity Loops.
Studio. I don't know. There was one that I downloaded a trial version for. I cannot for the life of me remember what the name of it is right now.
Different one.
Yeah, it was a different one. I don't know. I was going to ask you about it, but I can't remember it. Awesome. What would you recommend for somebody who's starting out and wants to getting into just music mixing or music editing or just something along those sorts?
In my own
opinion, free ones out there?
In my own opinion, I would say Reaper is good because it offers 2 licenses. It offers a cheaper license that's $60 for a person who's doing music on a lower commercial level. Like if you're not selling and making over $10,000 with your music, if you're not on a large label, you'll give you a $60 license. But if you have a much larger capacity for business and you're selling a lot more material, they'll charge you $225 to use the service. But in a lot of ways, most of the time, if you're making more than $10,000 a year, you're probably going to be licensed with a studio that's already going to be paying for your material, or you're going to be hooked up with somebody who uses big name material like Pro Tools. But Reaper, once you get through it all, it's pretty easy to use, and you can use it on PC or Mac. And and also if you know what type of instruments you're using, like if you're using good instruments like a good Korg or Yamaha keyboard or a good Gibson or PRS guitar, and you're using, and you know how to mix and how to edit frequencies and EQs along the way without going overboard with feedback, noise, and compression, you can create good quality material if you know what you're doing and you have a little patience with what you're putting into it. And even if my music doesn't sound the best of the best, I still know with the budget that I've used, I can create good quality music with the budget that I'm using that doesn't cost tens of thousands to use in a professional state-of-the-art studio. Right. Especially since there's no need to. Like if I know that I'm not signed to a deal or I don't have a deal or I'm not in a huge production movie, that money can go towards more lucrative expenses or every basic day-to-day needs just to be sensible.
Food, shelter, things like that.
The stuff you need.
Yeah.
Potentially. I don't know.
All that good stuff.
any advice in general for anybody that might be wanting to start a music career? Anything that you learned on your musical journey that you wish you knew before you started that you want to pass on to the younger generation?
I would say just do what makes you happy and do what ultimately makes you happy. And whatever style you choose to do, don't expect to be an overnight success and don't expect to make $1 million out of it. I would say do what makes you happy first and do what you love. If you do something that you hate, even if you're good at it and even if you make money at it, you're only fooling yourself at the end of the day. I mean, because if you do something you don't like, it's going to eventually show in your work and you're going to be resentful about it right up to the day you die. And I figure, if you really love something, no matter how weird it is, no matter how unpopular it is, or how underground it might be, do what makes you happy, and the rest will be a bonus.
That's really good advice.
That's
Okay.
excellent advice.
Yeah.
So I guess that's my cue. So typically I do a question of the podcast that's different every time. It's usually tailored towards the guest that we have on. We all go around the horn. I usually start with the guest first, but you get a pass just in case you can't think of it right on the top of your head. Then we'll go around back to you. But this one is what is one film score or score from video game, television show, movie, doesn't matter, that really stuck with you? That really had emotional gravitas towards you. Typically, it's when you're younger and it's something that that really stuck with you. But there's a score that this really stuck with you and made you feel a strong emotion. One way or the other. It don't matter what the emotion is, as long as it's a strong emotion.
That's interesting. I would say that would be a coin flip between the very first Halloween and the very first Friday the 13th movie.
Nice, nice. Why?
Because I love the use of augmented and diminished chord clashing within the score itself. The simplicity of the less is more approach, in particular with the Halloween score. The variations aren't very different, but there's a lot of minor seconds and a lot of tone clashing, which make it very dramatic and suspenseful. Whereas the Friday the 13th score is just a complete mix of very lush, tranquil, yet very eerie soundscapes, along with some very interesting, yet, gut-wrenching bursts and very percussive rhythmic sections throughout, which unexpectedly hit you when you're watching it, especially during the kill scenes or when the mother finally reveals herself to be the killer at the end. That's when it becomes really tense. Particularly the surprise scene on the lake when the music is very nice and then Jason appears out of the water. That very instant clash when the music suddenly gets dark and very menacing, that right there, that stuck with me.
Very nice, very nice. Love it. D.
I got two of them.
All right.
One is the Nightmare Before Christmas, just because I love Danny Elfman.
Who doesn't?
Both my kids love that movie. They love the score. My wife loves it. My wife used to sing almost every song when we were walking our kids to school. It's just something that we used to do as a family. We still do sometimes, where we walk the kids to school and we sing along. And then the second one is that stuck with me is Queen of the Dam, just because it's one of the best soundtracks really out there for a film. Not only because Jonathan Davis wrote most of those songs, but because I am a big Korn fan, I'm a big Jonathan Davis fan. But I think, in my opinion, it is one of the best albums or soundtracks out there for a film.
Oh yeah, Danny Elfman's great. His work with Oingo Boingo was genius back in the '80s, and then when he did Beetlejuice, and then he did Nightmare Before Christmas, he just proved himself to be a master with creating that very fast, menacing classical motif.
Oh yeah,
he was genius with that.
Yeah, fun.
And on a side note, I did see Beetlejuice on Broadway this year with my girlfriend. The adaptation,
how was that?
Absolutely wonderful. I absolutely recommend it. Yeah, very funny, very creepy, very vivid, and just very well put together.
Nice.
We really need to decide on when we're seeing Evil Dead.
Yeah, we're gonna go see the Evil Dead musical. It's coming to Chicago, so
very cool.
we gotta go.
I've seen it a couple years ago, and it's a very good time. And it has a splatter zone. Like I remember I was talking to somebody once. She was talking about how she saw Hamilton on Broadway, and my tickets cost $2,000. And I said, "Yeah, well, I saw Evil Dead the musical, and that was only 90, and that one at least had a splatter zone."
Nice.
It's pretty fucking fantastic.
2,000 for Hamilton. Wow, you wasted your money.
1,000 for Hamilton.
That's fucking retarded.
Damn.
Anyway, is Zachary.
There are two movies that I consider to have literally perfect scores. Terminator 1, Brad Fidel. I'm constantly repeating the Terminator theme every goddamn day. And then Jaws by John Williams.
Fuck.
Jaws by John Williams is brilliant.
It was mine.
Those are two movies with literally perfect scores that I've just grown up, and I love them to absolute death. I can't decide which theme, though, I love more, the Terminator one or the Jaws one.
I
But both
noticed
of them
a couple fun
fantastic.
facts. I remember Terminator, that one snippet, boom, boom, boom. Fear Factory used one of those snippets in their song Piss Christ on Demanufacture in 1995. And it just fits well with the song because then it's like, and then boom, boom. It sounds very industrial and it's very cool. And also the Jaws theme, if you've ever heard of Stravinsky's composition, The Rite of Spring, there's a lot of similarities in a lot of the movements of the Jaws score with Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring. Now, The Rite of Spring is based on Russian folklore and a pagan ritual where a young lady is chosen by her tribe to dance herself to death as part of the sacrifice to the spring gods. So if you ever get to see that or hear that ballet, it's mind-blowing, and you'll hear a lot of John Williams influences taken from that into the Jaws soundtrack.
Gotcha.
Nice.
I have a quick question for you real quick. Have you played the recent God of War game?
I have not. I've been meaning to because I've heard amazing things about it.
I wanted to just get your opinion on the soundtrack because I think Bear McCree's score of that game is the best video game score I've ever heard in my life. Especially for anybody who's played all the games leading up to that point, it's a whole other level.
I will definitely check that out. I will definitely have to check that out. I've heard it's very promising. So
yeah,
I'd add that to the list.
I'm trying to think because one of his earlier questions of the podcast, quite a few episodes ago, is favorite horror theme, and I chose Phantasm for mine. But now that he's asking about scores, I'm trying to think of something that has more than just a great theme to it. Because to me, a great film score, it helps lead your emotions throughout the movie beyond the theme. The music can react to the actions during a certain scene. Characters or events will have certain specific motifs dedicated to them. And also, since this is a horror podcast, I want to try to keep it within the horror genre. A few non-horror scores that I really like are, of course, the Danny Elfman, Tim Burton collaborations, particularly Big Fish, The Lord of the Rings by Howard Shore, of course, the Jurassic Park score.
Yes, go on.
Which is arguably one of the greatest movie themes ever. But if I wanted to get back to a horror score, I'd probably go with The Shining from 1980.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's both a great theme during the opening credits, and it has those great reactionary moments within the music, particularly towards the end where Jack finally goes crazy and tries to kill everybody. I just really love that score, and that's one that, and I first saw that movie when I was in my early teens, and that's probably the horror music that stayed with me the most. More recently, going on that thought process of score of actually having a score. The TV, and Zach and I have talked about this a little bit, but I really like the score of the TV show Preacher because that one actually gives each villain and each hero it's their own motif, and they're all very different, but it all feels very organic, and it all feels like it's for the same story, but every character's motif is different from each other. You just don't get that in a lot of movies and shows these days.
No, I mean, a lot of the horror scores in a lot of contemporary horror movies, especially even movies that I enjoy, like I'll mention like Sinister, The Babadook, like a lot of those types of movies that have that paranormal element. A lot of the scores are very simplistic and minimalistic, which in their own right work very well with the movies. I just like, in my own opinion, I enjoy the more elaborate compositions where they get more deep into the film that have a more effective punch. Whereas a lot of the more modern films, it almost sounds like each score for each film is very much cut and paste. It's very much like the strings roll like, and it's been done so many times that it just becomes, it sends you the chills, but there's no variety. And I like variety in my choice of film scores and movies. So I feel like the variety is somewhat lacking, for better and for worse in a lot of ways, because I feel like it makes the underground creators and the creators that are not in the spotlight, raise the bar and push the envelope more in their talents and put out some very interesting art.
Nice. So I guess that's me. And funny enough, this is actually an incredibly hard question for me, because my favorite composers are the composers who write scores for films. Danny Elfman being number 3 for me, and then of course Hans Zimmer being number 2, and then Johnny Williams being number 1.
Yes.
With several other honorable mentions going back and forth. I mean, I could sit here and talk about Jurassic Park, Back to the Future, The Dark Knight, what he did for The Dark Knight, and then also I do like Inception for his very ominous tones. I think the ones that really have an emotional resonance for me are the Exorcist theme, for obvious reasons.
Yeah, The Exorcist.
Psycho, just on an understanding level of what that did. My Nana saw that movie when she was 12 years old, and she could not shower for a month without her father sitting on the other side of the fucking curtain, guarding her and everything else. And I know a huge portion of that was that fucking score that made that much of an impact. So there's a story behind that. And then the Chris O'Dell for Halo, the Halo theme, and all the things he did for that, including in a more horror-esque of the scores that he did for the Flood. When the Flood came in the games, it was a very, very horror-esque. But Zach stole mine, and to me there is almost no substitute is a theme for Jaws in that movie, and I think what resonates me the most is about Jaws, with the exception of a few scenes that could really happen, and and the opening scene is so captivating and everything else, and it's because of that theme and just those 2 notes. And actually Elton John said it the best. He says, you want a hit fucking song? Make it so you only have to play 2 notes, which is Benny and the Jets. Yep. And then everyone will fucking recognize your song.
Absolutely.
Johnny Williams was able to successfully do that with 2 fucking notes and everything else. To these 2 notes are a reminder to get the fuck out of the water and fast. So, and the greatest thing about this too is not only is there an element of adventure in this song, when you hear the little bit of like the I don't know what instrument it is, a little bit of the higher pitched violin, it's a little bit more adventurous. It's the underlying of the song. But there was a film critic in a documentary talking about this song. He says there's just like a shark, there's a propulsion to this song. You can't stop these notes. These notes are coming at you, and they're getting faster and faster and faster and faster. And there's nothing that you can fucking do except get the fuck out of the water. And that's what's so amazing about this song. And I remember when I saw that movie for the first time, and I went wow. And I had here been a fan of John Williams for long before then. With Raiders of the Lost Ark and Back to the Future and Jurassic Park and fucking Home Alone. Home Alone.
You're forgetting a big one.
It's the Star Wars, but I said it that sometimes without even
you need to say it.
Star Wars.
He also did Brian De Palma's The Fury.
Okay.
That's that exploding body moment at the end of the movie that I talked about a couple of episodes ago.
Yeah, that's right.
Who doesn't want to see who does not want to see a full body explosion, blood going everywhere set to John Williams music?
Yeah, that does sound pretty great. But when I saw this, I heard this music for the first time, it was unbelievable because nothing felt so real and so tangible than his score. And actually, there's a really good. If you're ever bored on YouTube, if you watch the trailer for the movie when they put it onto Blu-ray DVD, there's a great cut of it in the commercial, and it really, really sells it. And you're like, when you see this trailer again, you're like, I want to go fucking watch this movie like now. So he is the quintessential master of movie scores for me.
Oh,
and yeah, there's no other score that I can think of that really has an emotional hit like that.
I think if you really want a great example of like how that just works for that movie, and it's my favorite scene in the entire movie, is when Hooper's in the cage. Like he's adjusting his goggles. He sees the shark approaching, and the song starts low, slow, and then as the shark approaches, it gets louder and faster until the shark just passes by. And then it's super intense, and then as it goes further by, it starts slowing down again, and the music fades. And then out of nowhere, bam!
It's like they snapped the fucking boombox to the damn shark.
Yep.
And the music gets louder as the shark gets closer, and then as he goes away, it gets lower. Hey, it's ingenious, what those three guys can do with music and to enhance the experience of a movie. But I do got to give props though to The Exorcist though, because that movie is already scary all by itself. But man, does that put you in a fucking mood? That puts you there. You're there. You're right there. You're right there dealing with that crazy girl.
All those composers you mentioned, complete geniuses in their own right, and I think even composers like Bernard Herrmann, who did the first Psycho, he was a genius. He did a few other films which I can't remember off the top of my head, but he was very well known for his work. And from the Friday the 13th movies, Harry Manfredini, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Harry Manfredini. Yeah, he's done some really cool work with the first few movies, and with the exception of Friday the 13th 3D, which had that disco theme that came in for the first part,
which was fantastic.
It was funny. It was very funny, but like it just, to me, I was just like, oh, when I first saw it when I was younger, I was like, I wasn't expecting.
The hell is this?
I was expecting it. It just came out of nowhere, like and I was just like, okay. It just took away from the scare factor a little bit, although the rest of the scores that he did for those movies carried a very consistent theme and had a very consistent apprehension and repulsion throughout, especially when they got to like a final chapter, which I think is the last great Friday the 13th film, in my opinion. I mean, they all have their own good qualities, but I feel like Final Chapter was the last amazing film in the series where I was just like, wow, this is the best, the classic. Like A New Beginning was good in its own right. Jason Lives, A New Blood, and Temptation Takes Manhattan, I have to be in the mood for them, or I have to just say, okay, I'm going to watch a marathon and just watch those. But I feel like those are... Jason X is just... Oh, man. Can't do it. I tried. I can't do it.
It's such a fun movie.
Almost every horror genre has to have some kind of like
something that they go to space.
Off of
they go to space. So they're going to fucking space. Like every action movie and every horror movie, they eventually end up in space.
Yes.
I really want.
Like, where do we go from here? Let's go in space
Freddie
now.
and Michael still have yet to get the. Wait, has Chucky gotten there yet?
No.
Okay,
he hasn't got there.
He's gone to Hollywood.
I mean, Leprechaun's been everywhere.
He's also been to military school.
It's one of my favorites.
I will say Cult of Chucky was awfully hilarious, though. Yeah. When they had a bunch of Chucky dolls invade a mental hospital and just start killing everybody and possessing everybody. That just, to me, was just funny.
Wait, he multiplies?
I had so much fun.
You didn't watch the Cult of Chucky?
I stopped at The Bride.
Everybody needs everybody needs a horror movie that they could just laugh their whole way through. Mine was Freddy vs. Jason.
Freddy vs. Jason's hilarious.
I fucking love it because it's so damn funny.
How about Pumpkinhead? Like the original 1980s Pumpkinhead.
Yeah,
it's a great movie. I love that one. I love the idea.
But then they did nothing with it in the sequels.
Well, the sequels were, let's take all the rules we established and just say fuck it and just do whatever we want. Which is nothing that interesting, but screw it.
Because we know how much you love when people break rules and lore and tradition.
or one of my favorite scenes that was funny and scary was one of the final scenes from the Tales from the Dark Side when the husband admits to the wife that he drew all the gargoyles, and then she turns around and she's like, "You promised you'd never tell," and then it turns to this big evil gargoyle and eats his heart out and breaks his neck. I'm just like, wow, that's hilarious. The kids turn to the gargoyles, so I'm just like,
I will say though, I did not see that twist coming at all.
oh no! Like when I first saw it, I was just like, whoa! It was mind blowing.
Thank you for spoiling it for these guys, though.
But yeah, that was. But the rest, the other segments, because it's a horror anthology. It covers a mummy that's brought back that has a curse where it comes to life and then takes a coat hanger and pulls brains out of people.
Julianne Moore, by the way.
Because what the fuck not?
Yeah.
And then the cat from hell, the second. That was amazing.
God.
Which did you know the Tales from the Dark Side movie? That a lot of people consider that to be the unofficial Creepshow 3.
Which should have been.
A lot of the same people. The cat story was a screen written by George A. Romero based on a Stephen King short, and of course Tom Savini had involvement with it, I believe. But yeah, a lot of people consider that to be the real Creepshow 3 and not the Creepshow 3 that we got. I don't know if you know about Creepshow 3.
I did. I saw it. It was hideously bad. Not even in like a good way. I was just.
It is like painful.
Ouch.
It is one of the most painful things a human can ever sit through.
Like splatter painful?
No, Splatter was hilarious.
Splatter is funny.
It's funny, and I would actually watch it again because it was that ridiculous. I
would not.
Creepshow 3
Dude,
is
it's so
soul
funny.
crushing.
Oh, that sucks.
The one film that makes me laugh all the time when I watch it is Leprechaun in the Hood. Because he's smoking weed with iced tea. That is fucking hilarious.
Back to the Hood?
No, that's in the Hood. Back to the Hood, I didn't make it through because I was. What the fuck?
Listen to the title. It's Leprechaun in the Hood.
The fact
you know you're in for a ridiculous time just off that alone.
The fact that he went back to the
when I say back to the, I mean back number 2.
Yeah, back to the Hood.
THA Hood.
I will say, speaking of the Hood, I like the first original Tales from the Hood that came out in 1995, though. That had some very creepy, interesting imagery, especially the very last Clockwork Orange-like segment where Crazy K gets taken to jail and they put him on the spinning wheel and they gag him and they just spin him around a million times while it shows people getting murdered and shot. That fucked with my head. And then they put him in the century deprivation tank. That was just creepy as hell. And then it came back to him lying dead in the ground while the gangbangers blew his brains out.
It was nice.
I need to see this movie.
You should all do it together.
The oh my god, and then I was actually in a fucking bar on St. Patrick's Day, and they had Leprechaun in the Hood on, and I had left.
Oh god.
I was with Sarah and her 2 other friends. They were fucking chilling. I actually took my beer and sat and watched it.
I was just like, I'll be over there.
This is so bad. I was just sitting there like transfixed on how fucking bad. Dude, he was in the fucking in the kitchen with that one other guy and he was smoking weed and then he killed the guy in the fridge and then the dude's body was on the floor. He hid in the fridge. People walked into the fucking kitchen and made a sandwich and made a couple drinks and didn't even see the fucking body that was right there. You're like,
okay.
Whatever.
So I've got a question for you all now. Being that you're from Chicago area, what do you think of Candyman?
Love it.
I really like it.
I love it. I think I talked to these guys before about Candyman. It's one of the first movies as a kid that traumatized me and scared the fucking shit out of me. Surprising.
Your mother just was like, Clive Barker, this is a good show for children.
Yeah, I love Clive Barker.
Just like, wait a minute. Still realizing a pattern here.
Still not as scary as the actual Cabrini Grin was. Cabrini Grin was actually much fucking scarier.
Yeah, you don't walk over there. You're just like, nope.
Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. They tore that fucker down. But yeah, it was. Yep. Yeah, that'll give you a good idea.
Dude, they paid gangbangers to just not fuck with the set.
Yeah, that's
really?
Yeah,
those are in the scene where she's walking in the building, those are actual gangbangers who live there.
Yes, yeah, they were selling drugs.
Yeah, and that's what I loved about the movie. It showed you the gritty nature of the urban horror of the projects of Chicago. I mean, I've never actually been to Chicago, but I mean, from seeing what I've heard recently and from, archives of what I've seen, Chicago has some sections that are just a very strong underbelly. Some scenes where, you just don't want to go in broad daylight, or night. It's just,
I was going to say, if you don't want to go there in broad daylight, you don't want to go there at night either. That's
yeah.
You just don't want to go.
Candyman captured that really well with that vivid imagery, and combining that with the urban legend, that just made it even more unsettling and just chilling when you watched it.
You know what's so funny though? You go there now on Division and Larrabee right there. There's a beautiful super Target there now, and right across the street, beautiful condos.
Yeah, just
it's like Pilsen is like that fucking chick from Mean Girls who keeps trying to say fetch. It's like, stop trying to make Pilsen a thing. It's not a thing. No. It's never gonna be a thing.
Well, that was
a fucking brewery and a film studio and a couple good places, and that's it.
That's it.
Stop trying to integrate it.
Yeah, if you go there now.
Yeah, but it kind of like it reminds me of like when I first watched it, like going back to Clive Barker, he just knows how to like hit you like right where you feel the fear the most. If you read his books of blood or if you watch his movies, he knows how to get you and knows where to find your fears and knows how to play on those fears with his words and his imagery and his art.
Yeah. Absolutely. He is a fucking genius.
Yeah. I will tell you this though, you ever come to Chicago and you want to come and hang out and everything else, we'll bring you down over there and we'll show you, hey, this is where it used to be. It's a giant fucking field. It's a field now.
Yeah. Chicago's a really nice place. You just don't go.
There's just certain areas.
Yeah, it's really simple. Just like don't go here, don't go there, don't go there. You'll be fine.
It's literally like it's a 2-block radius in the west side, a 2-block radius in the south side, and a 2-block radius up north. As long as you stay out of those areas, you're fine.
But that's like New York City too. I mean, that's like every city, but New York City too is the same way. Like, you go to the spots in Brooklyn, which are like the touristy hot spots. Then you have the places that are really cool. We have live music and, a lot of different cool parks and so forth. And then you have areas that you just, even so, like certain areas where the roads are shit, they're just not paved. And like, you're just driving and it's like pothole after pothole, boom. And then you hit that one spot and you're like, oh, fuck, man.
The union guys didn't make it this far. It's the point of no return.
It's like, oh, no, fuck it, turn around. Nope, we don't get paid enough.
Put a fucking sign and everything else. This is where we stopped.
Enter at your own risk.
Yeah.
I actually came up with another question. As you were talking about the score for Friday the 13th Part 3, is there any movie that you just absolutely hated the music from it?
Ooh. Okay. Oh my.
Oh boy.
I'm trying to think. This is a heavy question because there's a lot of movies where I didn't like the score of the sounds, but that is my bias because a lot of 80s horror movies, particularly Creepshow, for example, just didn't have the technology to create music that had a good sound. Like, if you hear that early synthesizer, that early Moog analog sound, some of it is just very primitive and very dated. So, when you watch movies like Creepshow or you watch even movies like Prom Night or, you go back to the 70s and you watch movies that emerged from that era, especially in the later 70s when they started using the synthesizer technology, even like a film like Tenebrae, like Dario Argento's Tenebrae, which I thought was a cool movie, but some of the soundtracks just sound horrendously dated, with the very 80s sound. Didn't age very well or transcend into modern time. So I would say a lot of 70s and 80s scores had good ideas and great tones, but the sound quality to me just doesn't appeal. But it's a hard question because you have to consider the context. I mean, there's a lot of modern films, like I've said, where if you look at movies like Sinister or movies like Get Out or, The Babadook or, some of the later Saw movies or the Hostel movies, a lot of the scores are just cut and paste, just not really bad, but just mediocre. And you don't really get much from them. They fit the movie well, but they don't really hit you. You're just kind of like, okay, waiting for something to happen. And you're just like, you're not really feeling what you're anticipating at that point, and it just becomes a little bit of a letdown. Although I will say, and this is not horror related so much, but one score I really did find interesting was the very first Dirty Harry film score. And it was like very creepy. very creepy and very jazzy throughout, and that score kind of really set in and really like gave me the chills.
A lot of people don't realize about that movie and everything else. Yeah, it's everybody remembers do you feel lucky, do you punk and everything else, and they almost always associate it with action, but there's a lot of thriller in that movie. I mean, it really talks about the underbelly of San Francisco and how shitty it was, and you're talking the aftermath of the Zodiac, and how things were not going well at all. I mean, and also a very creepy and highly underrated villain in that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it actually does have a really interesting score, to a supposed action movie, but there's a lot more thriller elements in that movie than I think a lot of people give it credit for. So the score is really good and appropriate for that scenario.
Yeah. So like related to that, I think it's unfair. It's unfair for me to say from a musical standpoint that a music score sucks, like that it's bad.
Mm.
Sometimes I might not be a fan of the quality of the sound or the style or the delivery of it, but I mean, who am I to say that a composer sucks? Because I mean, every individual composer's got their own mindset and their own approach to creating, and in their mind, what they did was really well done and well thought. So I have to give credit to every single composer out there on the indie level or the major level, even if it's not necessarily my cup of tea or something I would listen to, as a go-to or even watch as a movie of choice. I still give everybody credit for their own artistic output.
Fair enough. I have a safer question for you then. What's a score that you heard that you're like, that's a really mismatched? The score is not of bad quality. You enjoy the score and everything else, but you're like, what the fuck is that score doing in this movie?
Oh yeah, I've had that many times. And I'm gonna say this because believe it or not, and this might make us laugh, but I think if you watch, like, for example, like the later Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies of the 80s, like the content is great. Like the very first movie had very minimal music to it, but when they got later on to the 80s, and you started getting to like the very dancey type soundtracks with the heavy metal and the new wave, and then you incorporated synthesizers on top of the killings, you're just like, what's going on? Like movies like that, and then you get into like Warlock, and then you get into like some of the early 90s horror movies when they tried to transition more into like the demonic movies and so forth. I don't know, it just became more like cookie cutter. In the 90s, though, I feel like horror sort of even tailed off and went more towards action and thriller, like Devil's Advocate type movies or Ninth Gate. It went more mystery and supernatural and more deep into action rather than actual horror. And I didn't feel like it was until the 2000s when horror made a resurgence with the Saw movies and the torture porn films.
See, he said resurgence came with Saw.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
I like him. With a very particular movie you like.
One of the resurgences happened with that and everything else.
No, the key word.
Let it go, bro. Seriously. I'm sorry. It's popular opinion. Get over it.
I mean, it's right.
We're discussing the 90s resurgence with the movie Scream. I
don't know. I mean, Scream 1 was great. I feel like the opening scene was brilliant. And
absolutely.
There were a lot of elements in the Scream movie that were really well done, but I feel like Scream was also a ripoff of the movie When a Stranger Calls from '74. It took a lot from that. The very first scene, particularly the killers inside the house, and like that movie When a Stranger Calls. That first half was fucking genius for the time it came out. I feel like Scream took a lot from that, and the rest was kind of like, taken from a Beverly Hills 90210 kind of thing, where everybody was like, oh, it's California and we're all in love, and oh, like the bullies and jocks and, the popular kids. And then when you watch Scary Movie, when that parody series came out, you're just like, wow, this is amazing.
I love that.
I do love
the first three movies are fantastic.
I do love Scary Movie. I do laugh. Like, as stupid as it gets, I do love them. I do love them.
Strange Days Scary Movie 2 was my favorite of.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Awesome.
It's my least favorite. 3 was my top. No, 3 was my favorite.
Was it 2 or 1 where they made fun of Poltergeist? And the
3.
was that the dummy got him, and they tried to pull him underneath, and the dummies tried to get away.
No, that was the second one.
That was the second
Yeah.
one. Yeah. Oh my god.
The
Fucking
Haunted Mansion.
Oh, that was amazing.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I don't look at Scream, or I don't know. I Know What You Did Last Summer. I don't really look at those movies as horror movies. I look at them more as like thriller combined with like that chick flick genre. I don't know. That's just my own opinion. It didn't really like sit in. I felt like you tried to take like typical high school drama type, college type drama, and mix that with horror, and then
Well,
yeah,
you're not wrong.
really-
I mean, you're not wrong. Actually, it's to me, it's more. David Arquette's probably said it the best. He says it feels like a John Hughes movie gone to hell.
yeah, that's a great
and like, you decide whether or not you like that. I like the John Hughes movies. I have for a long time. And
Yeah,
I
they're
kind
great.
of make a sequel now called The Breakfast Club Goes to Hell.
How
No,
much of
John
the cast is still alive?
John Hughes was a genius. I mean, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. A lot of those movies in the '80s that he did were pure gold. And in the comedy setting, they worked really well. I mean, but just in a horror framework, if you want something that's just scary from start to finish, that just leaves you with the chills. I mean, you go for something that's got a little more of a cutting edge existential theme. Something that's like more nightmarish, like something that sets in with a Lovecraftian or a Clive Barker theme or Stephen King, early Stephen King theme. Then you're getting into creepier territory.
pre-cocaine or post-cocaine?
When I think of great Stephen King, I think of Salem's Lot, like the original
Yes.
Salem's Lot.
Yes.
Like that to me, the book and the book and the original movie, that was just him at his best, when he was at his scariest, when he was more like direct with his storytelling, and it just really gave you the chills. And he was very blasphemous and very, there's a lot of very religious stuff in the very first one that would unsettle a lot of people. And you're just like reading this, and you're like, holy shit. It's like, this is like blasphemous as fuck. Like, it's like this could offend people all across. And this was back in the 70s when he wrote this. So I was just like, wow, like it's very cutting edge for its time. So a lot of the stuff he's done post 1980s is much more watered down and tailored much more towards a pop audience, a more, middle of the road audience, it seems.
Something to be said about that.
Okay.
I tend to flow towards more things that are satire. So I guess that's why I gravitated towards Scream, and that's why Scream and Cabin in the Woods are two of my favorite horror movies.
Cabin was great.
That was a great time.
The joke I've always made is that Scream asked the question, Cabin in the Woods answered the question. So,
that's a good way to look at it.
That's how I've always figured it. And I Know What You Did Last Summer is actually a dumpster fire. I am not a fan of I Know What You Did Last Summer. I enjoyed the second Scream. The third Scream is it's something.
Scream 3 is where the real resurgence of horror.
It's not what we wanted.
Please.
But maybe the one we deserved.
Too much.
I don't know. I think Scream 3 was the best Scream.
It was
the horror movie you need.
That's the sir.
And then you got the found footage genre too, which is complete hit or miss.
Yes.
It really is.
You can oh my god. Although I will say though, and I talked about this with Lee, our last interviewee, the marketing team behind the Blair Witch Project are the second biggest geniuses in the history of marketing ever.
Yes, I absolutely agree.
Only to be beaten out by the motherfuckers who invented 99 cents.
Great way to put it.
They to convince the whole world. I mean, the stories that were coming out of this, they had state detectives, people from state entities, not the FBI, but state entities, because the FBI was dealing with terrorism in '99, and nothing changes. There was state detectives calling up the producing staff, asking if they can reopen the investigation to find these fucking kids. And it wasn't just one detective, it was several, like 10 different
That's
ones,
amazing.
10 different organizations around them. When you can reach that level of marketing of your film and impact of your film, fuck your opinion about the movie. You've won. You've won the prize. And then that's why it was one of the most successful horror movies around for the longest time.
Well, I mean, in its own right, it's if you watch it and you suspend disbelief and you put yourself in that movie itself, just for this purpose of that, I mean, it is pretty creepy in its own right. If you if you go into it and you say, okay, I'm going to shut out the outside world and pretend that I'm part of this constraint and this paradigm, then yeah, it is pretty creepy. You know, if the supernatural and the supernormal and the paranormal is something that you find that you either believe in or you find has had experiences with, I mean, it can be creepy. If you're one of those who disregards the paranormal or the supernormal, and then it's really like just, okay, now it's just a scary night in the woods. What the fuck am I doing here? You know, on that hand, though, I mean, it's still good for what it is in its own right. But you know, I feel like I feel like a lot of found footage films, like Paranormal Activity, for example, they had creepy moments in there. I mean, the first and second one were all right, but I feel like they just beat a dead horse after a while and just got deeper and deeper. And after a while, I just lost interest and it just became less exciting.
I feel like they just got more ridiculous and comedic. Like, every movie was a prequel for like the first like 4 movies, which I'm just like, stop going backwards. It gets more ridiculous. Like when they were kids, their grandmother was part of a cult, and they got kidnapped, but nobody remembers it.
They apparently had digital cameras back then.
Yeah, that too.
However,
we've reached Halloween 4 ridiculous-ness.
Yeah.
All right,
However, I will say that the VHS movies, VHS and VHS 2, those were pretty well done. Yeah. Like those had some creepy moments. Those, if I were to recommend found footage films to anyone, I would certainly steer them towards the VHS movies.
Or Wreck, or the original French film, and then also too, my favorite actually of all time is Cloverfield.
That's a great one.
I'm a massive fan of Cloverfield. I've always said positive things about it. And the other movie I really enjoy, because I like to watch bad things happen to bad people, is Unfriended.
Would you call it a? I feel like that's a new.
That's a
thing.
new.
Like it's
that's
not
like
found footage. It's
but
like
it kind of is. It's like Skype footage. It's digital. Digital found footage.
Yeah.
And all those people in that movie are terrible people.
Yeah.
I'll give that movie this much. You keep watching. I thought it was gonna hate it and turn it off immediately. I'm like, all right, I just now like what's happening now? Okay, wow, I'm still watching. Holy shit, I didn't turn it off.
Death by Blender, bro. Death by Blender.
It's so stupid.
I remember ending the movie and the credits were rolling, and I'm kind of glad all of you are dead.
Well, yeah, because they're all terrible. Like the only one who was even like kind of a decent person, but he still wasn't the boyfriend. I'm just like, I kind of wanted him to live. Everyone else just needed to die.
Yeah, you convinced the girl to commit suicide, and she came back and fucking haunted all of you and killed you. Sounds like mission fucking accomplished, man.
There you go.
Good for her. I'm proud of her. You did.
There you go.
May you rest in peace, rock and roll, bro.
At least now, hopefully.
It's like the
Look, and here's the thing: she didn't even just kill them. She ruined their like lives, like their memory and everything. She like exposed all the shit they did online and just like no, these are how terrible these people are.
Actually, I have a PSA idea. Instead of teaching all the kids in school, anti-bullying campaigns, just show them that movie.
Brilliant. You did it. Hit on the head.
Anti-bullying online that you can do.
It's actually not a bad idea.
And show them the original Carrie too. The original Carrie.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah, because Carrie is the best anti-bullying revenge film I think in history, where she just wreaks havoc on everybody.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if it's in frame, but we have a Carrie poster right there.
I don't think it's in frame. Yeah. Well, not enough of it is in frame.
Yeah.
Still can't believe John Travolta was in there. I didn't.
He had to do something. Like in between Saturday Night Fever and Grease.
Before that.
Was it?
I was gonna say this was like his first movie. I think.
Really? He was probably still back hotter then.
Like the only reason his name is second on the poster is because he was not second bill when that movie first came out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Carrie's great, and those early Stephen King movies are great. Carrie sounds a lot. The Shining, even though that was nothing like the book. I do like Creep Show.
Stand by Me.
Stand by Me. Yes.
What was another one? I gotta go with the list now.
Christine.
Christine.
The Stephen King. Did you get a chance to see Doctor Sleep yet?
Not yet. I've heard about it. I might actually go check it out. Part of me was very skeptical, but then when I saw the attraction and the trailer, I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it a shot. Just in all fairness.
We all, the three
The
of
Dead
us.
Zone. That was another great one.
Dead Zone was brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Dead Zone was brilliant.
Doctor Sleep is definitely my favorite movie of the year. Absolutely.
All right, I'm going to have to check that out and see it for myself.
Like
Misery.
Misery.
Yeah.
Oh, Misery is pure genius.
Yeah, that is definitely.
Misery is-
I could say is my favorite Stephen King.
The Shawshank Redemption, even though it's not
Okay.
horror.
I don't know. I think Running Man is
Love
probably
that.
my favorite Stephen King movie.
How about
Thinner is great.
We've all seen The Mangler, right? Haunted Laundry Press.
Oh my God! Yeah, I heard about that. The the lollygaggers,
The Langoliers.
the Langoliers, whatever.
Oh,
the fuck it's called. It's the same shit. It's the same shit.
Nobody's gonna watch it.
Anybody remember that? Remember that? Yeah, I didn't think so. I don't know. They were in an airplane and people fell asleep and then people disappeared and they landed on some weird runway and the soda is flat and then they got back on the plane and then one guy disappeared and the end.
One that I want to rewatch because I haven't seen it since it first came out is Secret Window.
I haven't seen that.
I recommend it. There's
Me too.
back in in the early 2000s there was some really good thrillers. There's also some really bad ones, but there's some really good thrillers coming out at that time, and that was one of them in that mix. I recommend it. It's actually a really good movie.
I really liked The Mist.
Book was great.
This was great.
What's 1408? One of his too.
Yep.
I never cared for that one.
I need to
I
rewatch
watched
it.
I
I
didn't
saw,
care for it.
yeah,
either.
I need to.
Like I thought it had an excellent setup, and I
Yeah,
thought it
me
had some
too.
good moments. But at the end of it, I was kind of like,
Yeah,
I
no,
don't
no
really
payoff.
care.
No payoff.
yeah.
Yeah.
I need to
At least in
rewatch
my
it
opinion.
because I haven't seen that movie in well over 10 years.
And I'd rewatch it.
Me
Yeah.
too.
I enjoyed it. I didn't love it, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ending.
I just don't remember it.
I remember. And
You know.
yeah,
I think it discovered that most people are pretty selfish.
Then there's the
Yeah.
debacle that was the Carrie remake,
oh yes.
which do you guys know? Which do you guys know the behind the scenes story about that one?
Oh no, I know about
No.
this too.
So the director set out to actually make it a much more faithful adaptation to the book, which the Brian De Palma movie was still pretty close, but there are still those little things that keep it from being like an extremely it's a faithful adaptation, not an extremely faithful adaptation.
One question.
Yes.
Which remake?
The 2013 one, the theatrical one, not
Okay.
not the TV movie.
Okay.
I never saw the TV movie, which I've heard, which I think the Brian Fuller who wrote it, I don't know if he directed it, but I know he had heavy involvement with the TV movie remake.
Mhm.
He was on the Mick Garris podcast once, Postmortem, and he was talking about he really loved the performances in the movie, and he feels like it's one of those movies that the edit it ended up with is not good, but you could get a good edit from the movie if you wanted to. That was his feelings for the movie. But the 2013 remake, which first off I thought Chloe Moretz was a huge miscast of Carrie,
Oh, yeah.
because one, she's just too young, and two, she was freaking Hit Girl. And I'm supposed to buy that she has no self-confidence.
Yeah, in a post you a year ago, and she says like like which one of you cunts want to die first, and then she has to play a shrieking violet in the next
Yeah.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense.
Anyway, the director set out to make this a much more faithful adaptation to the book. If you go on the IMDb, you're gonna see like a lot of extras, or they might have taken. Yeah, you're gonna see a lot of like extras that are uncredited because their scenes were cut. What happened was after the director finished filming, the studio decided, no, we want this to be a remake of the original movie. So there's a lot of footage that ended up in the final cut and a lot of stuff that got cut out. And it's like when the director saw the movie, she was just like, I didn't direct that.
Yeah, it's almost like recording. It's almost like recording a song that's like 8 minutes long like with like a very elaborate composition, and then 5 minutes it has to be cut out, and then you get 3 minutes and it just has no structure because that 5 minutes you took out had something significant to do with the piece. And it happens with a lot of like progressive metal bands like Dream Theater or like Symphony X or a lot of those bands that write 10 to 11 minute songs. They can never have radio edits because then you lose the song by the time they edit it down, because a huge chunk of the solo or the structure within the track would serve to have a huge purpose in establishing the song. That's why like a band like Rush in the 70s, Rush never got much radio play because half of their songs were over 10 minutes. And within that 10 minutes, every section had a purpose and made sense.
Fucking Neil Peart can go on forever, man.
Oh yes.
Like let me also drum and eat a rotisserie chicken that I just started fucking making. He would like leave his drum set, put it in the rotisserie, come back, keep playing and everything else. It would be done. He'd stop playing. He'd go and get the fucking rotisserie chicken, put it in his mouth, and then keep fucking playing, and then cook it up. He was
and still not miss a beat.
Yeah, no, and not miss a beat. It's crazy. It's amazing how like people like fucking Meatloaf got any radio play. All his shit is like 10 minutes long too.
Oh yeah, everything he did. Paradise by the Dashboard Light, Bat Out of Hell, I Do Anything for Love. The album version's like 12 minutes long, and
absolutely.
And you hear the radio edit, and you're like, "Where's the song?" And then you hear the complete version in 12 minutes, and you're like, "Wow, this makes sense now because every part serves a purpose." And it's almost like watching a play or seeing a movie. Like you have to encapsulate the whole entire thing.
Oh yeah, it's right. Can you imagine like him cutting out parts of Paradise by the Dashboard Light?
Oh,
you wouldn't know what the fuck was going on in the story.
No way, exactly.
So you know what? Stephen King being
we should do an episode about Stephen King movies. I don't think we've done that yet.
We said we were going to.
We've gone a while for that.
We've talked about Maximum Overdrive enough, so
I would love to see an episode on Stephen King movies because especially the progression of the earlier ones up to the more recent ones, and to see how it changed. They changed from being very gory and graphic to much more dramatic and science fiction oriented to a lot more of the more dramatic ones like Shawshank and Green Mile, and a lot of the more like the ones that make you reflect more instead of just sit back in horror. So that would be very interesting if we did an episode on that.
Tell you what, after the new year, do you want to come back and do a Stephen King episode with us?
No.
I'm down. I'm totally down.
Awesome. That's even better.
Okay.
And just add a personal recommendation too. If you have not seen the trailer for Maximum Overdrive,
there it is.
We're in Stephen King land.
This is fine.
It came up naturally.
Yeah.
This is Stephen King land. If you have not seen this trailer, I highly recommend it for many reasons, because it's a ridiculous movie, but also Steven's clearly high on coke while he's doing this fucking trailer. We all get to see what a visionary director genius he was.
That's amazing.
We think he was, as we know he was.
All right, I'm going to take this back full circle now, because I've mentioned I thought one of your songs had inspiration from this. The music in Maximum Overdrive was by AC/DC.
Nice.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That is
and a lot and like guitar work in some of the tracks, like the Spellbinding, has that similarity, a very subtle similarity. And if you listen to like even like the other track, like As the Sun Sets, You Emerge from the Ashes, has that like 80s rock little bit of undertone to it that carries it through. And then I wanted to take it to the very end of the album and talk about the track Requiem, which has that very melancholy, poignant theme to it, like very sad. That it's almost like a mournful ending of a movie where you see like the ending scene of the person leaving the cemetery or the person saying goodbye to their loved one as their ghost disappears back into the light. I got inspiration from that from a lot of like the endings of certain movies of the 60s and 70s and even up through the current day, where the lover parts ways with their dead former lover, or the child parts ways with their dead father who's been slain by the demon, or the one who sacrificed their life to save the lives of their family, who is bidding farewell to those he left behind. And that's the vibe I wanted to capture it with. I wanted to end the album on a more like farewell note, so it sort of has a beginning and an end and doesn't leave you hanging.
Nice.
Yes.
And every Cucurbitophobia release, every final track on the album has that same vibe. Epilogue on Tapestries of Terror, for example, is a very moody ambient piece inspired by John Cage, very piano driven, and just makes you sit and reflect. And then the final track on Ghost Town on the Coast, Dedication, is very symphonic and has a very like adventurous kind of John Williams feel to it, and it almost makes you want to sit back and just be inspired by the scenery around you, almost as if you're there by yourself, not knowing where you're going next, but waiting to see what lies ahead.
Nice. What a nice sentiment.
I think that's a
That's
good.
that you we ain't gonna find a better note than that to end it on.
We're not gonna top that for an ending.
Yeah. That was very poignant. We'll do final thoughts.
Well, overall, I enjoyed this album. I think you have massive talent there. We definitely feel the passion that you have for creating at least this type of music. Because when we listen to it, it doesn't sound like it's just all thrown into everything and into a blender and just mixed up. And here you go. We can feel the time that it took, the love and the passion that you had to create this. So,
thanks.
Definitely my favorite song, Omnius Mansion from Oak Road.
Mm-hmm.
I'm such a big fan of classical music. I enjoy that. I listened to that track like 2, 3, 4 times. Amazing.
Nice.
Squirrels.
Yeah, no, that was coming.
David literally took my thoughts word for word, like literally word for word.
Oh, that's my job.
Zach, in editing, you can just copy and paste David's audio onto my speaking.
Yeah, just go move your mouth a few times, and I'll just have David's voice come out.
Oh man. Oh God.
I can't wait to see what you do next.
Yes.
And then he stole my one. I'm actually very much looking forward to whatever your next adventure is. I'm very much looking forward to having you come on and bullshit about Stephen King movies. I really. The thing is, though, we're gonna have to all collectively refresh and probably watch as many as we possibly can to get ourselves prepped.
You guys can come over and watch The Lawnmower Man.
Oh yeah.
Another classic. I love that.
Well, I'm a big fan of Pierce Brosnan, so there's that.
Look, the big one is Running Man. That is clearly the best.
Sure. So thank you so much for being on. We really appreciate it. I'm very excited to see what you do next, and do that. I got you. And I already know what you're thinking. I got you.
He had to get his.
So, if you would be so kind though to tell all the fine folks where they can find you, where your website, if you're on Instagram, Facebook, and any kind of plugs that you want to do, the floor is yours, sir.
Absolutely. If you want to find out more of my work, you can visit my website at Cucurbitophobia.com, where you can find my music and my merchandise, including the signature Haunted House t-shirt, which is available in all sizes. If I ever am sold out of a certain size, I will have the size within immediately, and all orders are shipped within 2 to 3 weeks of delivery. Music is available on physical CD and digital download, which can be found on Bandcamp, on cucurbitophobia.bandcamp.com, or iTunes, Apple Music, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon Music. You can find it digitally, or you can buy a CD if you want to show your support, and you'll have bigger perks when you do buy physical product from me. You can also find Cucurbitophobia on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook if you want to follow me on social media to find any new updates, or just me posting a couple of photos or videos of any interesting things I might find. Although I do not use social media very frequently to project everything I do in my life, I do find some interesting photos or interesting art or movies that I'm interested in, or any ideas that I might have. I tend to put them out into the world just to share them with anyone who's interested in viewing them. So as far as what lies next, just follow me on social media or visit my website and keep up with me, and I will be more than happy to let you know with what I decide to emerge with in the near future. And when that is, I will leave that open to a surprise.
Ooh, very nice. Surprises are good. And then, of course, our lovely audience, if you'd be so kind to like, share, and subscribe at the Midwest Horror Network. You can find us on all social media platforms. And also, you can find this podcast also on Spotify, or you will find this on Spotify and also SoundCloud and then Anchor.
I don't think we're on SoundCloud.
We're not on SoundCloud. Okay, we're not on SoundCloud. We're on Spotify. We're on Anchor. We are not on Apple Music.
Because they won't let us on for some reason, and I can't figure out their policies.
It's so sorry.
I don't know. It's Apple. They're terrible.
Yeah, so you can find us there, but you can also find us right on the Midwest Horror Network YouTube channel. Just go ahead and listen to us. That would be super awesome. Thank you very much from behalf of all of us.
You're welcome.
Also, if you have a slasher account, we do have a Midwest Horror Network account on there where I have not posted anything yet because I don't know what the hell to post, but I will be posting stuff on there sooner or later. I don't know.
Some stuff about Living Nightmares episode 3 coming soon.
Yeah,
or this podcast, or any of the other ones. Thank you so much, and
you're welcome. It's been an absolute honor and pleasure, and I hope you all have a great rest of your night. Enjoy the rest of your season. I wish you a happy holiday and a happy new year, and I can't wait to jump back on with you fellas soon.
Hell yeah, absolutely.
Soon for the rest of you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
All right, have a great night.